Three, two, one, go. Alright, Brandon. Uh,
Yes.
so recently, I've turned 17, and I've been, I got paid a lot of money for it, and my parents, they got me a bank account, and during that entire day of getting my money transactions to my savings and uh, I guess other thing, I forgot the other thing's called. Uh,
hmm
I had the entire day to think about being an adult and how much that scares me. And
Yeah.
since yeah, we have all kinds of responsibility and whatnot. And since you're already an adult or you're on the verge of being 21.
I'm officially 21 as of April 4th, so uh, I've kind of dwelled into it. I haven't really had too much more experience than when I turned 18, which is when I kind of really started going to, well, let's see. Well, I was still in high school, and then once I got out of high school, I took like like a month break just to enjoy the summer before I would start college. And then I think amidst that time, I got my first job because I actually had just too much to do and not enough time while I was in high school to have a job at the same time like some other kids could.
Hmm.
Um, so I was kind of late to the party for that, and I didn't get my driver's license until I was 18 because I just wasn't sure of myself, wasn't really feeling ready, all of that. So I waited,
Hmm.
and then I got my driver's license, got my truck fixed up, and then I ended up getting my job, which for the whole story in itself, long story short, that place closed down due to bad management and at a bad location. So I only was there for like maybe 3 weeks. It was
Damn.
bad. Yeah. So that Butcher Chicken ended up going to another location here in Arizona. I think it's pretty far. Um, but the food there and everything was good. It was just bad management and stuff. I think my boss also had like personal issues, which is why it was bad management because he had a lot of going on and he just seemed stressed out the whole time. Just
Hmm.
generally wasn't really good. Um, so after that, I ended up going to Target. It was a seasonal job for the winter, so I wouldn't stay there for very long. There was a chance they would pull me into the ranks for as like a permanent employee there, and what I did was essentially a all the online orders that would be placed there.
Hmm.
I would have like a device that showed me everything, right? And I would take a cart, I would look through the item, grab everything as much as I could, put it all in the cart from both the store or like out in the store front, and then from the back in the warehouse, because it was like one of the really big Targets,
Hmm.
and so we actually had that stuff, and we had our own shipping area in the back, so that's where I would take the cart. So occasionally they would have me boxing instead of getting the items. That job was really hard, only because of my like it was long hours. I would be like super super early in the morning or super super late in the night, um, like for a long period of day, just walking across the store. And I didn't have good shoes, which is what made it hard. So my feet were just dying. Right, like I just had a
Ah.
van, so it was just flat. So it was just it was brutal. That was the most tiring part. Other than that, it was an easy job as far as like if you could learn the store and everything like that, it wasn't so bad. And that ended up being like the case for a lot of jobs, where it's like for the most part, like as long as you can learn where things are at, um, that doing your job becomes much easier. The hard part that never changes, like if you're just in customer service in general, hardest part is just dealing with people. And no matter where you go,
Yeah.
anything like that, you're gonna deal with all kinds. It doesn't matter where. And then, oh, so uh, once I was done with the seasonal position, um, they didn't really need to hire anybody else on board. It was just kind of for the seasonal, just because Black Friday, Christmas, all that stuff was
Hmm.
just insanity. It really was. It was kind of insane to see just the sheer amount of people that would buy stuff and how much really goes into what you do in a store and what they have to deal with. But you know, so for a while there, I focused on school. Initially, I was just I wanted to be an artist, right?
Mhm.
I wanted to do animation because while I was in high school, I did EVIT, which would take up literally half of my schedule. So I would only take like 2 to 3 classes actually at my high school, and then we would take a bus, and then for like the rest of the like 4 or 5 hours, I would be at EVIT doing 3D animation and all of that stuff. So I wanted to continue that on. Went to college, Gilbert Community College, because it was cheaper. Didn't make sense to go to a university right off the bat because one's too expensive. I still have to do prerequisite classes anyways, and I could just find a transfer path out. So it just made more sense to do that. Whole time I was worried. Same kind of nervous jitters you have first day of school kind of stuff.
Mhm.
I feel like that never really goes away if you have it. It's always gonna stay with you.
Yeah.
Uh, and then I started to do. I got a job at Walgreens, and I still work there to this day. It hasn't been a full year, but it's about to be. Or maybe it has been at this point. I think I got in at October. It's like around October. Yeah, yeah. No, actually, it's
Yeah.
been a whole year plus because I was there last Halloween. I was there, so yeah, it's actually been a full year. There's actually the first time I've worked at a place a whole longer than a couple months, um, which is great. But uh, yeah, no, it just made me hate customer service even more. So that's all I really got to say about that. Trying to balance school and work's been kind of hard, so you always got to make sure if you're doing that, if you have to do both at the same time, make sure you're taking minimal amounts of class and minimal amounts of hours, so you have ample time to do both, and then actually have free time. Because if you burn yourself out with too much work,
You get
right? Like if you
stressed
try to
out.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, you get stressed out. You get tired of everything. You feel like you don't have time for stuff. Um, for me, I start making compromises, and I just kind of start taking back some stuff, and I'm like, I feel like I end up not making as much project progress, but that's just me being hard on myself as well. On top of that, so I found that like you either do one end or the other, or find a way to like balance them out properly while still giving yourself enough time to like hang out with friends or chat or I mean obviously we can't do that with COVID right now as
Mhm.
much as we used to, but um, just kind of if you can find what your groove is and stick to that as much, it's pretty good. Oh, give me a second.
Oh, okay. Let me pause the time. Pause.
Um, so that's kind of yeah. So finding your groove, all that, I would say would be really helpful. I don't think I've necessarily found what my groove is. I've taken a lot of like personal time to kind of figure out stuff. Like I took a break from school for a couple months, um, just get stuff sorted out. I ended up kind of changing gears because I found out that like I think I'd like drawing more as a personal hobby and time that I do just occasionally because I'm not really good at sticking to being dedicated enough to draw all the time, right?
Mhm.
Um, I think I could do it, right? Like you have to stay dedicated for whatever it is. It doesn't have to just be drawing or stuff like that. I think there's a lot of like push in this culture in our own families too, where it's like we're expected to do a lot and like
Yes.
accomplish a lot so early on, and that pressure is just scary as hell.
Mhm.
And I think it's kind of really unfair too because it's like we don't need to rush our lives. Like this is what I'm saying personally to you is like it doesn't make sense, right? Like you're 17 and I'm like 21, right? And I don't feel like that should be a marker of we need to be getting stuff done by these ages.
Yeah.
Um, and just finding your groove and stuff like that is going to be so much more enjoyable for your life because honestly, that's what matters more. If you're enjoying your life and happy and
Mhm.
stuff like that. If you could dedicate all your life to becoming this super rich billionaire and like up until and you've reached that point in
Yeah.
your mid to late 20s if you somehow like miraculously like just found the crux there and you're working hard and stuff like that and you really like had the intuition and drive push through all the craziness that this world, puts people through, and you came at the top. Well, you wasted all of your youth,
Mhm.
getting to that point, and like all the time you sacrificed to, get to that point could have been spending, you know, interacting more with new people or friends and things like that. And it's not like you can't doing that as well, but it's so much more harder to do that without, sacrificing so much of your youth, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I think that just sucks more because it's like life's not all about reaching this some kind of end goal, right? It should never just be like, oh, I'm gonna put all everything I got into this one or couple different goals and stuff like that. It should just be like goals are just these markers to get you to these point in life that you think you want to get to, so that way you're not just aimlessly going about, right? So that way you actually have some kind of direction.
Mhm.
But at the same time, that shouldn't just be your world. At that point, you're not really being human anymore. You're just a
Human.
slave to that goal, that ambition. You're just, you know, and I don't think that's healthy. So, uh, I mean, I can go on about a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So I'll just ask about, is there anything you particularly want to know or ask about or interested in, either about me or anything that I guess I could explain about adulthood with my limited amount of, knowledge of that, since I'm only 21, I really haven't experienced much.
I mean, you have
Um,
more life experience than I do, and I'm sort of glad you came on anyway. It's been about like 15 minutes, and I only asked like one thing so far, and
yeah, I kind of
that's
ramble
actually
on
good.
about.
I'm not. That's not a complaint. That's actually really good. I guess another thing I would ask is what was a big influence in you? Because I know a lot
Big.
of people they don't really have good influencers. That's why you see people out on the street and I guess dropouts whatnot. I mean that's when I people watch like at the mall and stuff or just driving by like on the freeway and you see homeless people. Uh, what I think about, what goes through my head is that this person on like who lives out here used to be a child before, and I always ask myself, what went wrong in their lives. But what was a good influence on your childhood?
See, I think it had to do in part with my parents, because my parents they were young parents, right?
Mhm.
They had me pretty young. And they kind of really were super supportive. They always told me when I was a kid, even when I was a baby, right? That like, love it back, we love you, and things like that. Like they just wanted to give as much energy and time to just supporting me. They didn't treat me like a mini them like some parents could, where that's just like you have to do this or stuff like that. Like they're trying to do what quote unquote is best for you, right? They're setting up
Mhm.
things like that. They didn't do that to me. They didn't also just leave me by the wayside and like, oh, you're fine, do whatever you want. It wasn't completely like that. But they also gave me enough freedom, things like that, and choices, right? And just generally showed that like they're there for me, right? But they're not going to be there all my life as well. So they kind of set this precedence that, or I don't think that's how I say the word, but you can kind of get it.
Yeah, I get it.
Where like it really is my life. It's up to me, but that I'm not alone. So that I think that generally helped. I mean, there was this aspect of still this pressure from not only them but the rest of the family, because everyone, I was like the firstborn, right, in the family,
Mhm.
like first kid. Um, for the most part, I think some of my other cousins, second cousins in the family, both on my dad's side with you guys, and my mom's side, I think, that were like dramatically older, but kind of like I was the first of this kind of next generation, I guess you could
Yeah.
say. Um, But like all my cousins, everyone, they're all younger than me. So uh, there was this kind of huge amount of pressure that
That we
the
look up
family
to.
yeah, that like people would mention it, right? They didn't mean to put so much pressure, but they did. And it wasn't until recently where I'm like I'm the type of person to self-reflect. I mean, you can tell like how much I have to say. I ramble
Yeah,
on a lot, all this
it's cool.
stuff. Yeah. Thanks. But that kind of that messed me up in a way because it's like all this pressure, all this stuff like that, and I was already like super hard and critical on myself. I was a rambunctious type, so like I would play too rough, and because they were younger than me, they couldn't just handle it. So like playing tag or whatever, like stuff like that, and accidentally like slide into them or whatever, and they get hurt. And when that
Kind of like
happened, I wouldn't be like oh it's their fault or anything like that. No, I'd be so down on myself, dude. It was like I get
kind of
scolded and feel like the end of the world. Like that's how hard I was on myself, stuff like that.
kind of like how we
Um,
fought in the bouncy castle.
yeah, exactly. Exactly like that, dude. I felt so bad because I'd get too into it. I'd just get too much into it, and people would get hurt, and it sucked because it's like try to have fun, and all of a sudden it starts to hurt some people I care about, and it's like fuck, and then I don't, and then I overthink like what does that person think of me, things like that. Like they probably like are annoyed by that or whatever, all this degree, and I usually try to like do my best to just never really settle on that's how people think of me, and that I can always just, as long as I keep up a better front and apologize and keep self-reflecting and making sure like along the way, like all right, where am I at, what am I doing, where do I want to be, just asking those questions of myself and potentially even other people, like your loved ones, stuff like that, friends, family. I think is something that's helped me out not only with that for myself, but to just be an adult, right? Like my idea of being an adult has has always been something I've determined for myself and didn't allow the rest of the world or other people influence too much, right? Like I didn't let it be set in stone, and like I always made sure that the most important thing I did was like I keep evolving, I keep changing, I keep growing. I don't settle on any one idea or notion, right? I just keep adding and molding and changing as much as I can, because I think that's like the essence of what a human is, right? Like we're not. That's how we've advanced so far. We didn't just settle for one thing and leave it at that. We kept growing past that, and I think that's really important. So when it comes to like my early childhood and life stuff like that, I never really let like whoever I was looking up to at the time or people influence me, let that be the only thing that was influencing me, right? I kept looking for more, I guess, an insatiable need to learn. I was just curious, always curious. That was just me, but I think that's something that we as like a society need to do and strive
Yeah,
for, is like we just need to let us have the time to grow and experiment and figure out stuff, and hopefully while we're doing that we're not facing so much of the negative things that could really put a person down, right, and feel like they can't do things that this is their only path, which like how you mentioned, like some of the people that like they were kids at some point, that these homeless people, these all sorts, right? And like how did they get to this point, where they don't look happy, they look like they're struggling, or they are legitimately struggling, whatever. Sometimes we don't really know what a person is going through and all of that, We all have our stories, and it's just always intriguing and weird to see, someone end up so hurt and so like deprived of not only their
joy.
youth but almost like their
Yeah,
future, you know. Their adulthood isn't, they couldn't enjoy it. There wasn't anything for it, and there's just so much that's like why, and so I think it's always sad to see that, and it's hard to say for certain what caused it. There's just too much, to say. Everyone has their stories, whether it was just that person's fault alone, they gave up on everyone else, or people gave up on them too. Kind of depends on the person, but I think that you kind of have to be the one to break that cycle, you know? You have to
Mhm.
be feel like you really are your own person, and that's something that can be hard for people because it's just circumstances, you know, whatever
Mhm.
the circumstances are, whether it's how their parents were raised, whether they had parents at all, or both, you know, just anything and everything, you know, it's a factor, right? But what helped me out, like, was differentiating myself from that, feeling that like I don't want to be the person that does that, you know, like let's say your parents is like being over dramatic about something, right?
Mhm.
Yelling at you about something potentially just ridiculous. Or maybe it's something you don't understand the full scope of and it actually is serious, right? But you don't see it that way.
Mhm.
And I think it's important to always, whether you're on the side being the one yelling or scolding the person at or the one being scolded, I think it's important to take a step back when you have the time to and really reflect and think about everything, you know, just not even the situation itself, but like about yourself, like what you're doing, how you're, you know, because it takes two to tango
Mhm.
for a lot of things. You know, I like that saying, right? It takes two to tango because it really does. Like, right? It's not
Mhm.
you're not the only person in the world. The world doesn't center around any one of us, not even the Earth itself. You know, pretty um, insignificant when it comes to that. But I think that's important that we are not the center of the world. That there isn't that there shouldn't be and isn't a kind of set goal for us to achieve that this grand thing, right?
Mhm.
Because otherwise, what would be the point of our free will? What would be the point
Yeah.
of stuff like that? And it's evident that we do have free will, and there isn't a point because look what the world has become. You know, it's just amalgamations of people's what's a good word for it? Well, I guess intent, right? It's not really grabbing the full scope of it, but it's hard to really explain that with just words alone. It would take a long time to. But general gist of it is that like over the years, there's just layers upon layers of people's actions and intentions manifesting and spiraling into this kind of chaotic mess. And because we've had different beliefs, different things, and all this stuff, and it's hard to break out from the norm and be who we want to be, right?
Mhm.
That this whirlwind of stuff keeps sweeping us back in and causing more of a chaotic mess. And that's the scariest thing about this world is that cycle, right, that we've
Mhm.
caused
It's
keeps
unpredictable.
happening. Yeah, and in a way, it really is unpredictable. The predictable part of it is that we keep fueling it, right?
Mhm.
And there technically is really easy solutions to stuff, like conceptually, right? To understand what is going on and how it is, for me at least, is easy. And a lot of stuff I could put in layman terms, but there's too much for me to talk about there, so I don't want to take up too much time. We could probably get back into it, another time. But
I'll be down.
yeah, I like that. I
Yeah.
just like talking.
I mean, the reason why I started podcasts is because I wanted to hear what people have to say with the people that I know who have something to tell, and just like what Uncle Iro says, you gotta gain knowledge from not just one source, but from like many sources, from many people.
Yeah, dude, Avatar Last Airbender hits it on the nose with some stuff. Uncle
I
Iroh, dude, it's like,
I mean, and the good thing about like me putting this on YouTube is that either me or you can, come back and revisit this.
yeah, yeah. I think it's really important to like just talk with people, and like YouTube is a really good way to like, and all these different like media platforms are a good way for people to like kind of put out their thoughts, and
Hmm.
things like that. Um, Obviously, there's some people that really don't know what they're talking about, but it is a good way for them to put it out there regardless, right? Like some things, whether they had the intention to really teach or just for them to vent out, right?
Hmm.
That's how we get some like really funny, like weird, memeable stuff, right? Like just people putting out there for others to enjoy or for themselves to vent or whatever, right?
Hmm.
Um, but I think the important thing again is to like really always take with what you're seeing and learning and things like that, and really think about it, even if it's something goofy, right? Sometimes like comedy has been a really good way for people to realize like, wait, this isn't right, or like this is, things like that. And like, on a like a less public level, right? Like if you're just chatting with your friends, I think it's always pretty cool if you can just get real with your friends and just be like, hey, like, how are you feeling about this? Like, what do you think of me? Or maybe not so like blunt and direct like that, but in your own ways, right? Kind of just be chill and just talk. Like, it doesn't always have to be about what you have in common interest. And sometimes you might even find out that you and that person may not even be good friends or compatible, right? It just happens.
Mhm.
Like, I can go on about like so much stuff.
Share Factory limits me to an hour, but we got 27 minutes left. If you want to touch a little bit in this, feel free.
Okay. I think though I kind of want to like give this a little bit more structure because I've been all over the place. Just kind of how I am.
It's alright. It's alright.
Um, cool. Um, I'd be down to do another one of these podcasts too.
Definitely.
When I have time because I just like talking. um, but I realized at a young age that like the world is super complex because we made it to be that way,
Mhm.
and that a lot of the problems we face is intertwining between each other, right? It's not as just they're simple concepts, but because they intertwine with each other, that it becomes this bigger mess, right? And then there's
Mhm.
like this spectrum of stuff that goes on that starts to branch off, right? So let's say like I always like to live by the idea that the golden rule, as it said, they treat others the way you want to be treated, right?
Mhm.
You know. So and then from just that one single concept, right? It means so much more than just simply like how you interact with a person. It also means how you go about your entire life, right?
Mhm.
How you act, how you do things, stuff like that. It's not just about the people you care about and confront and things like that, but also like not maybe not a state of mind, but in a way that um, you know on the flip side, right? Let's like the negative things that are impacting us. Um, let's go something as simple as like alcohol, right?
Mhm.
Like alcohol makes you weird if you get drunk and stuff like that, right? Like scientifically from a standpoint, you're actually like a weirder version of yourself. And you can kind of tell that when someone's drunk because they're just a little off.
Mhm.
All right, like they're a little bit more too lax and stuff like that, and they kind of it just depends on the person, right? There's like different
Mhm.
levels of that. Like some people get angry or overly happy and stuff like that. In a way, it's just like a weirder version of the self, like a reflection of their deep stuff because they're not holding back, I guess you could say,
Yeah, that's
fully.
nice.
And so whatever they're dealing with, the problem that's on their mind is kind of just put out there. So if they're having like a lot of like tension and anxieties and stuff like that, and they're upset with stuff, and they don't know, and they were never really good to begin with, or good at dealing with those emotions to begin with, then it's just amplified even more by that stuff.
Mhm.
But it's not like as if alcohol itself is the core root of the problem or stuff like that. Like the prohibition was a perfect example, right? Like
Mhm.
people found a way to get that substance because they felt they needed it because they had all these stuff going on in their lives and they felt like
Yeah.
that was the one thing that would give them a release from that, right? Because they didn't know how to express that or it wasn't okay for them to express that. There's just all this different stuff, right? For this like one simple little thing spans this entire spectrum of so much more, and it potentially, if you're observant, can realize so many other problems that can amplify the effects of one thing, or things like that. And it can be conceptually, it can be physical. It just like there's so much that contributes to all these problems and solutions and things like that, and within those there's an entire spectrum of stuff, some of which, just like real color, right? Like
Mhm.
there's colors we can see and there's colors we can't, and sometimes there's these certain cameras that can view those colors that we can't see, and those cameras, right, relate it back to aspects of us is could be through like comedy, right? Comedy is, we could say, is equivalent to the camera that can see certain lights or reveals these lights that we can't see because it has you think about the context and content of the joke itself, like why it made it funny or and stuff like that. Like if you think about it, if you try to break it down, or the person creating the joke, things like that. I mean, not all. It's not like jokes in itself are like the answer or whatever, right? There isn't just one answer, or it's not like,
Mhm.
oh, every joke, you know, m- brings up some kind of societal problem or whatnot. Sometimes jokes are just jokes, and they're simple as that, and there's nothing more to it, right? And that's exactly what we mean by like, there's so many simple little things that end up spanning to be so much more complex, and everything is rooted in each other or connected and things like that. And it, it sounds overwhelming, and it is overwhelming to think about and to explain, but pulling back from all of that, right? Knowing that it is this chaotic mess, right, is like the kind of like the first step, right? The next step would be to address that. Look, I don't want to keep adding to this chaotic mess. It's okay if we do,
Yeah,
right?
I'm
Because we're
about it.
human,
Mhm.
right? But the key is to just little by little inch yourself away from some of the problems or things that you personally come across, and try to do your best to find ways you can outright avoid terrible situations, or like, or even find where you want to go, right? Like sometimes it's not about like finding what you want to avoid or what you don't want to do. Sometimes it's also about finding what you want to do with that. Where you want to go. What are you expecting? What do you want out of your life, out of the people around you, and stuff like that. Who do you want to even be around? Sometimes you're not in the crowd that you want to be in, and sometimes that's how those people out in the streets end up getting to that point. They got in a crowd they didn't really like personally feel comfortable with, but were the only ones they could connect with or tried to connect with,
Mhm.
and it led them down a pretty wrong path because those people also were making poor choices and going down bad paths and stuff like that. It's not to say like people are simply bad or good or any one thing, right? We're a lot more complex than that. But that also means that you really gotta keep that in mind, and just because someone seems like they're doing bad things, maybe you shouldn't always give up on them. And if there's signs that they could change and stuff like that, you can determine whether you want to change, right? Help that person up. You don't have to always feel obligated to, be a hero and do all the stuff like that, right? We kind of have to do what we feel is naturally right. Like there's this inner instinct we all have where we know that like this doesn't feel right or doesn't feel good. This person or this thing is something I either want to avoid or help out or whatever, right? That's kind of up to you, but which is why you have to take a step back and always look about
Mhm.
where are you at, what's your situations, your surroundings, stuff like that. Always be aware of things like that. Just take time. That's why I always thought like it's kind of unfair that we have all this expectation put upon us, or maybe their lack of sometimes, that we have to do things by a certain point. We have to do X, Y, and Z, and do a triple backflip. By the time we're like 23 or something like that. Some crazy absurd stuff, and some things that generally kind of make sense, but also still have too much pressure put on us that like we never really can enjoy the journey, right? We
Mhm.
can never really be okay sometimes, right? It's not like we have to be happy and okay all the time, right? That's okay. That's perfectly natural. Sometimes it's good to feel other emotions other than just one thing, whether it be happy, sad, anything like that. Um, you have to take things in moderation, and sometimes there's kind of like a beauty in that, right? Where
Mhm.
it's like sometimes it does feel just to let it all out. I can just cry when things aren't feeling so good. When you have the time to yourself and just kind of let it all out, right, for
Mhm.
yourself. And I think that's something we need to do, right, in this generation especially because we have so much put on us that if we don't find the time to let that out, whether it be by yourself or with like really trusted friend or family member, stuff like that, you kind of just have to find what works for you because we're not all the same or we really are different from each other, but that's not to say that we're so different that we can't relate to each other, right? Like we all
Mhm.
have different intensities of stuff like that, and we all have our stories we go through, but there is a common ground that those stories share at some point with each other. Sometimes you'll get lucky and you'll find that person that can share that story with you, and you can relate to that, right?
Mhm.
And then hopefully you can make friends with that person and really kind of continue to create a dialogue with each other and just grow from that. That's kind of how I ended up doing that, where it's like the friends I found, the family members I have, and just on my own time because I'm like such a thinker. Like I just constantly think. Like that's all I ever do, right?
Mhm.
Like even when I'm watching videos or playing games, I'm like thinking of how cool this is, and like oh this. And then I start thinking, oh this relates to this. This is like this, or whatever, or this is like a novel. I've never experienced this before, or things like that. Like that's just kind of how I am. Not everyone's like to that degree where I'm like thinking so much about a thing and relating it back, which is how I've gotten to this. Like I'm only 21 yet. I'm talking like I have like maybe 30, 40 years of experience. I'm not really good at like illustrating things and structuring things well, so it's just kind of like word vomit, just all over the place. I try to like the fact that I'm aware of that, right? Like I'm not
Mhm.
just completely oblivious is something where like, yeah, I know not everyone can do something like that, and that's okay. But the first step is like addressing those things, right? Like what you do, your quirks, your little things like that, um, and like figuring out like is that something you want to or feel the need to change? Maybe not necessarily change, but you know you could potentially rein in some stuff. Like I need to take a step back sometimes and think like, all right, Brandon, don't just start spewing out words like I am now, right? And you gotta like stop, hear the person talk back, and get response back, and let them speak, let them get what that they need to say out, and then go from there, right? Or like keep on track, on point in what you want to say, like which is why I'm pretty bad at writing. On top of just being lazy about actually improving that stuff, because it's just not something I care too much about in school. Which I can get a whole there's something I have to say about school, right? And I'll save that for another time. But I think that's one of the contributing things that makes it so hard for us to like grow up and not
Chat.
have like all this craziness put upon us, even
Mhm.
more so than it really could be at home. You know, um, I'm not really sure where I was going initially, which is like my problem. uh, so how much time do we have left?
We got 14 minutes.
14 minutes. Okay, so any questions or again anything you want to know more about in particular or want me to like focus on?
If I'm being honest, you basically answered almost all my questions I was already gonna ask.
Yeah, I'm kind of
That's.
a I'm kind of like I said, I'm kind of a monster when it comes to like I think way too much shit. Like I'm way too critical of myself, too harsh and stuff like that. I have like high expectations, right? But I'm
Mhm.
not like so much of a monster that I can't realize that like I have those things and that I need to be adaptable and alter those things on the fly and make sure I'm coming back to a realistic point or what that realistic point is even going to be, things like that. Um, I felt like right like recently I haven't really been putting my all into my schoolwork
Me neither.
and I've been slacking really badly.
Hmm.
But I also felt like it's not as if, right, me slacking off too wasn't
The
a
end of the
sign of,
world.
oh, I'm
Oh.
giving up or failure or any of that, right? Because in
Hmm.
that time, like all the videos and things that I watched and like all the games I played, all the time I spent talking with friends and things like that, or even just to my own, right? On my own, just to my thoughts. Or like I have a hobby of playing like card games and
Hmm.
physical card games, and the reason I like it is because I can think so much and plan and strategize and do unique things. Same with certain video games and stuff like that, like when they have like in-depth mechanics, right? I can like do that. And while I'm doing that, I'm like, I'm not only focusing on the game, but I'm also relating it back to like, this is similar to the kind of problems I'm facing in my life, ironically, right? Like there's reflections of stuff in the things people make. Um, right, and the stories they tell, or like when I listen to YouTube videos, like all the stories people say or the jokes they make or things like that, I'm like, this is kind of, I have this like epiphany, like this is kind of what I've been going through and what I've been feeling, or this kind of like all of a sudden I have this like sense of relief, or I'm like, someone actually gets it. I'm not the only person that feels like this way or been going through it, but it's
Hmm.
still different from me. But yet at the core root of it, it's the same kind of like initial emotions and core problems that we're all facing in it. Like I keep constantly like reflecting and thinking about this, and it's like the crux of who I am, I guess you could say, right? And so it's like I have so much to say, but
Yeah.
I also feel that like it doesn't have to be my job to take what I have and give it out to the world and things like that, right? Like you don't
Hmm.
always have to. That's pressure I don't need to put on myself. I think that's always important that like to understand. Um, and I always felt like in that time that I was taking time for myself, I still was growing, right? Like it didn't have to be in the norm. That's what I was gonna get at initially. It just kind of came back to me, like the whole point of like why I felt like I shouldn't have, and even though sometimes I felt like, oh man, my parents are gonna, kill me for like slacking off stuff like that. And I talked to them about it more recently, and then they still feel like, they're a little worried, that I'm not, you know, doing my all and stuff like that. And that's true, but it's not like I needed it, right? Like I felt like I've grown so much more as a person, and I value that more than just trying to speed through my life to get to this goal, a career, right?
Hmm.
Because like, what if I got to that point and I'm just like this little punk kid who didn't know any better and stuff like that, and was saying dumb things, or doing things that are just not okay, or that I could have done better at if I would have just taken the time to learn more about myself, learn more about other people, and what I want out of things, and just understand more. And that's what I'm doing, and I think I like that more, right? Whether or not people are gonna say that's X, Y, and Z, right, or anything like that, I think it's important to feel like, what are you comfortable with, and how can you push it to something that works in our life, right? Because we still have to keep in mind that like, we can't just do whatever we want,
Hmm.
and we still have to work within the bounds of stuff like that. Similar to a video game, right? It's not like it's not a complete sandbox, and even within a sandbox, there's limitations, right? Or there
Hmm.
could be, right? To some extent, even something as small as, oh, suddenly you just can't jump in this game, or things like that, or it doesn't, you can't adjust the lighting level or the frame rate, things like that. Like, it's funny how like even something as simple as a video game, like there's actually, if you really think about it, like reflections of things that actually happen in our real life, or quote
Yeah.
unquote real life, because it's not like you take like you're transported into a video game all of a sudden it's an entirely different reality, which you can have that feeling, right? Like you can feel like it's a new experience, and that's always really cool and fun if you can have that right experience.
Hmm.
But it's not to say as if like it's like the same with books, right? It's not as if like the content of those things is so different from our reality. Usually things are rooted from the problems and issues we face today and even before. Like history repeats itself, but sometimes it can be a parody of that. It doesn't have to be the exact same. It doesn't mean it's not repeating. Things like that. There's so much to really consider. It's kind of insane. But I think the important
Yeah.
thing is like, if you can simplify that to be like, look, this is what I want to do, and I've taken the time to really like ponder those questions and let like the world kind of pass you by for a little bit to achieve that, you might get something out of it that's going to be potentially life changing. And it's not like things are just going to happen in an instant or in a couple weeks or in a couple months, stuff like that. It takes time, and the important thing is just continuously reflecting on things, learning as much as you can, and what you think's important to you, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes like the society makes things seem so much more important than it really is, and it actually ends up being something not necessary. Like for school, right? Like we learn all these different forms, iterations of math, up to like potentially calculus and geometry, right?
Hmm.
But not everyone needs to learn geometry and calculus. Those things are can be important, right? But
Hmm.
I think those types of maths, right? Just for an example, right? Just limiting it to that, should be learned at a point in which you actually need to learn them for the topic or subject or whatever that you're learning at that time, right?
Hmm.
Like I think there's yes, there should be some form of general education, but also within that general education, branching paths that show that look, this whole entire school system is made not to like get grades and stuff like that and put this pressure, competitive pressure on kids where it's like, oh, you have to achieve this to get this paper to say that you know these things or whatever, right? And it should be more about like, look, I'm gonna teach you stuff, we're gonna guide you to a point where you have you know enough things to be like, all right, if I want to choose this path, I can start learning this path, but at some point I deem that I don't like it, I still have the time and all these years to go and learn this other path, right? Let's
Hmm.
say like I want to be an art student to begin with. I like drawing, right? Because I'm this like an 8-year-old. I've done like all my ABCs. I learned the full alphabet. I can write words. I can do basic math, maybe even all the way up to let's say multiplication, division. I think is really important regardless of anything.
Hmm.
Um, like there's definitely some base level things that everyone should learn, but I think at a certain point it should be like, all right, now that we've gotten you generally educated, so you're not just lost, you know. Now we can start letting you like, what are your interests? What do you like to do? Go explore that. That's the whole point of this new ideal school system, right? On what it should have been
Hmm.
from the get go,
Be
right?
curious.
Hmm.
Because
Um. Oh yeah. Sorry.
kids, yeah, I don't think. Well, high school's kids, they lack a lot of motivation because they're bored. It's I
Yeah.
guess it's the way like it's schoolwork now is being presented. It's is why they're bored.
It's always been presented like that. It's terrible. That's why I think at like a certain point we should have already been avoiding like one grades in the first place. There should never be this competitive thing to see who can score the best. It should be a marker of have you learned this, yes or no? If no, we continue to work on it. Not that we move on to another subject, right? And if
Hmm.
you're behind a little bit of the other kids, that's okay. Your individual work is now just going to be improving on that, right? And we have more staff on hand to help more kids, right?
Hmm.
And that those staff are trained specifically for the intention of helping these children grow, not to reach this benchmark level that everyone has to achieve because not everyone's on the same level. Not everyone thinks the same, right? That's not to say that someone's lesser than another person or anything like that. It just means they have a different perspective of things. And having a different perspective, or someone having that different perspective and way of thinking, is super important in how we've gotten up to this point in society, right? It's not just one person creating these things alone, right? These medicines that we have, these technology we have, they're not created just by one individual person. It could be inspired by one person's effort on how they looked at it and thought about it,
Mhm.
but it was a collaborative effort, right? It's
Mhm.
not like humanity is one individual thing, right? There's tons of us, right? It's not as if one hunter or one chieftain was the sole reason humanity survived up to the next point that the next generation could take it on. It's not something like that, right? And in the same way, back in school, it's important that we foster the growth of these kids to expand their talents, their uniqueness, their quirks, and stuff like that, you know, and give them the tools to sharpen that, to for them to use, you know.
Mhm.
And so in that way, school should have never been this monotonous thing where it feels more like a prison, where you're just like, all
Mhm.
right, you're given these tasks, you have to do these tasks. They're performance based. If you don't do this, you fail or whatever. You're looked down upon. Even if you quote unquote fail, you're still pushed to the next grade just because we don't, whatever. Because I know not everyone, like, school system fails you, right? They still like push you to the next grade sometimes
Mhm.
because they just can't or whatever, just based on difference in rulings and how regulations. But regardless of that, um, all of it, there's still this innate pressure that, like, I need to perform well. If I'm not performing well, I'm not good. I'm not, all this stuff like that. That's not healthy. That's not how we should be doing things or thinking. That's toxic. That's horrible. That's why we get people who are giving up and are bored and things like that. Just that doesn't work. And it's funny because if our governments, if our all these business and things like that really thought about, like, how they could help people and fix things, guess what? They not only make more money, but they have more people making new innovations, new things like that, and advancing our society to new heights, to new levels, which is honestly getting them more money because more people are succeeding. Like, there's just so much more pluses going this path, helping people and doing the right thing, that doing the wrong thing is only just causing us to go downhill faster. And it's just so ironic because it's like, are you stupid? Because you gotta be stupid. It's so clear, right? I'm like 21 years old. I have very little experience. It's not like I've studied any of this. I just reflected things. I just learned from other people. I just did things like that. Sure, that's my own little quirk and things like that. Not everyone's gonna do that, but it's not like your other people aren't capable of that. You know, it's not
Mhm.
like I'm so special. I'm this messiah or whatever, or this knowledge. No, I'm just some average 20-year-old kid. I don't even feel like an adult. I feel more like a kid. And honestly, I kind of like that because it's like, I don't want to. It should never just feel like, oh, I'm an adult now. I have to change my ways and act mature, quote unquote mature. And there's different ways to interpret mature, but I think the best way to do it and the most acceptable and right way to do it, subjective, but is to think that, like, look, you're just an improved iteration of yourself that makes sure that you're not harming other people. You're really thinking about what you're about to say and do, and that's a sign of maturity, that you can be the bigger person, right, and not let someone like react to someone's comment and put them down after they try to put you down. Like, you don't have to always stoop to those levels. You don't always have to do X, Y, and Z, right? Like, just using your emotional intelligence, right? Because it's different from book smarts, different from street smarts, I guess you could say. Like, emotional intelligence, right, in itself is like understanding how you're reacting and how other people are going to react, and like what these emotions are and stuff like that. And acting off of those things, right? And that if your emotional intelligence starts to grow as you learn more about, your life, yourself, other people, things like that, then you're maturing. And it's not a matter of age or do you know how to do calculus or something as like, oh, do you drink? Did you do this? Or like, did you drink alcohol? You're 21 years old. You should be doing this, or you can handle this, or this is a sign of that. No, it's not something. It's not like that. It's not like, did you get your job or your license by 18 or 16 or whatever, or that you needed to be that. That's not. That should never be a sign of, oh, they're mature or things like that. It's like, no, that's just a thing they achieved. That's not a sign of maturity. That isn't maturity. Um, like all sorts of stuff like that.
Hmm. Crap. Here, let me save the clip.